Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Powell, the manager of industry advocacy with AVIXA. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch today's panel discussion. As a member of AVIXA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, we wanted to take this opportunity to provide information and education for our community at large. We believe that as a catalyst for growth, we can be that for the industry, business, as well as for social change. My role today as the moderator will be to serve as an active listener, and so I can gain insights from our panelists' experiences, as well as learn what I can do to make a positive impact in terms of DEI. So I want to just take this time to thank our panelists, Jenn Steinhardt and Stacey Capps, who are part of our pro-AV community as well as the LGBTQ plus community. Today, they're going to be sharing some of their experiences in the workplace, and we'll be shining a light on what we can do to help make it a more inclusive and equitable environment. Stacey, if you don't mind going first, we would love to hear you and hear you introduce yourself. And if you could just share a little bit why you felt it was important to share your story with the AV community and belonging to the LGBTQ community in the workplace. And then, Jenn, if you want to take on after that, we'd love to hear it.
Okay, sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm Stacey Capps, and I'm a universal communications and collaboration engineer. So, since I moved to New York City, something like 12, 13 years ago, I think, um, I've worked as a consultant for audiovisual companies, and I've worked with law firms and financial companies mostly. So, when I first came to the city, I presented as being monogamously married and fairly traditional. But I was bisexual and had been for a long, long time. I just didn't feel a need to tell other people that. It didn't seem relevant to my life. But as time went on and my life changed, as lives do, it began to feel like I wanted a life where how I presented at work felt very similar to how I was presenting after work. And the process of coming out kind of taught me that I did feel like I was being more my genuine self, including in my job, where I hesitated less to share my opinions and ideas with others.
Thank you for sharing that, Stacy. So for me, I'm Jenn Steinhardt. I am a AV design associate, and I'm also in the Northeast. I live in New Jersey, and I work for SMW at the New York office. And for me, the reason it was important to talk about my story in the LGBTQ community, well, I guess I should probably share how I identify first. So I am a non binary female, and I identify as pansexual. And what that means is that essentially in my gender, I am non binary in that I do not necessarily identify as male or female. And then, but I do identify as a woman because my sex is aligned with the um, the organs that I was born with. So the two are very different, although they do relate very well. And then my sexuality is a attraction to all genders, and so that's kind of the myriad of my identity. And I use she, her pronouns, although I'm just as happy to receive he, him pronouns. It's a complicated relationship. While I support they, it just doesn't resonate for me. And I think it's important to be able to respect that the pronouns that you use are fitting to how you identify and what that means to you. So the reason that I chose to tell my story today is that when I was in early high school, I wanted to go to a pride parade. And it was organized through one of the teachers at my school had started a club for kids, give them a resource And we all decided as a group event, we were going to go share experiences, see what it was like. And I was told that I couldn't go. I couldn't get permission. And one of the main reasons that was given to me, and this is why it's so important to me in the workplace, is I was told, what if someone sees you there? What if the picture is taken? You're never going to be president of the US. So I didn't know that was my ambition in the first place. Um, so, if the fear is, oh my God, you will be seen, it made me feel terrified to even come out in the first place. And so when something Stacey had talked about is that when you're able to come out and share your story and be accepted, because that identity is such a fluid process and how we understand ourselves in relation to the world. And I think that when you can be your full self, you can be more creative, you can be more innovative, you can have more honest conversations.
No, definitely. Thank you for sharing that with us and kind of piggybacking off what you're discussing and talking about being your true self and the topic of identity. I know that there's been a definite push, especially with preferred pronouns and people acknowledging that and trying to understand who people truly are and not just based off of what we see, on a Zoom call or, in the boardroom. And, I'm just going to assume that you're female, so that you're she. What role do you think, if any, do preferred pronouns have in the workplace? Is that something that you think really should, be focused on more, and should we include them and, on our business cards or, name badges and things like that?
I would say this is evolving. And I think that's also the nice way to put it. The younger generation is a lot more comfortable identifying pronouns and introducing themselves with them. Um, People who are close to retirement grew up and spent most of their working lives without that being a necessity for them. And it can be, even if that's the norm around them, it can be difficult for them to remember to follow that protocol. And for that matter, to remember and respect others' pronouns if it's not what they immediately assume them to be. So I am in favor of using them. Um, I'm a little hesitant to require them or to shame people for not using them, um, because we're all human, and I don't think we get very far with just pointing fingers at one another, really.
I agree. I think it's one of those things that everyone has a different perspective, right? Like today, it's not like Stacey and I are representatives of all of the LGBT community, right? And so it's here. I think that it's important to ask. Like I think takeaways for the workplace is things like when you meet someone new. Hi, my name is Jen. My preferred pronouns are. Do you have preferred pronouns? And that way, it's just another way of getting to know your colleagues as you're networking and meeting two people. And it gives them that opportunity to say, hey, I understand, or I may not understand, but at least I respect.
No, that's a great takeaway and something that I've been trying to incorporate myself and it is evolving and it's something newer, but I'm just even having those type of conversations are helping others understand, why we're using them, in the first place. So I know on some of the calls that we had just to prep for this, we had talked about being queer in the workplace, and it's a term that I'm still learning when and how to use it. So this question is more of a two-part question. So can each of you share what it means to be queer? And how does being queer in the workplace, how is that an asset in promoting workplace diversity?
Stacey, can I jump on that real quick first?
Hmm.
So I want to highlight because I know it definitely in preparation for a call, this was a conversation that we had on just the term queer. Um, and terms in general, I think is it's same kind of conversation as we're talking about pronouns, right? Like, so I like to use the term queer because to say, hi, I am a non-binary female and I identify as is so long-winded. And so some people will look at queer as in this is a presentation style. Some may look at the term as, this is just my being and I am a person in the LGBTQ plus community. I identify as queer. And so there's very many different relationships with that word and even with LGBTQ plus in the first place. So I kind of wanted to start with that. Stacey, I will turn it to you and I'll jump off of the wonderful
Sure.
things you have to say.
Sure. I know at least one person who is LGBTQIA plus who doesn't like queer. In their case, they're asexual, and in their mind, they're like everyone else, only with less of that stuff. So they don't feel particularly queer or strange at all. They feel, if anything, more focused upon their work than the average person. Um, and so probably wouldn't love that term. But I think, again, the terminology itself isn't what's important. It's a lot more about cultivating an atmosphere where people can be different and be comfortable with that and feel comfortable around their coworkers. That's really all people are usually wanting.
That's great.
And how would you say being queer in the workplace has been an asset to promoting workplace diversity if it has at all?
So for my part, I would say that being a little different does encourage me to think outside the box. So I would also identify as polyamorous. That means I am able to love more than one person at a time. And if that occurs, I'm attempting to do so ethically and consensually and communicating with everyone about what's going on. And my partners, in turn, are also able to have other partners as long as they communicate with me and are ethical about it. And kind of understanding that was a journey which involved a lot of thinking outside the box and considering what I want and how do I accomplish it. And so I tend to take that same mind frame into the workplace with me. I know what I want to accomplish. There may be 1,000 different ways to do it. What is the most efficient and effective and elegant way to get to where I want to go? And I'll have maybe many ideas, but eventually we have to center on one. If you put a room full of identical people, they may all come up with an identical answer. And the best answer may actually be a little strange. So not everyone will have thought of it. But once everyone hears it, they're like, ah, yeah, that is better. So that is something that I think embracing the LGBTQIA crowd can give a company or a team that they might not otherwise have.
That diversity thought is absolutely key, and it may not necessarily be a thought that you had because of your identity, but just your identity shapes your experience in the world, and whether it's LGBTQ or it's racial or otherwise, religious, all of these things shape you in some form of fashion. Some other things that I think are really key is, Stacey and I have kind of mentioned a little bit on the whole being free to just generate ideas, speak freely. But it's also a matter of building trust. It's also, a matter of self sustaining your own energy. And what I mean by that is, say, for example, someone says, hey, is your husband coming to the holiday party? You know, or constantly misgendering you or anything like that. Like all of these tiny micro moments add up, and it can be really challenging. Or comments that are derogatory through the news, or hey, so I was just talking to this client and whatever experience that was not quite welcoming. These kinds of things will carry on into each interaction you have with your colleagues as well.
Mhm. And I would point to the role of imposter syndrome, which is already experienced more by women and non-binary people, by people of color, And then also LGBTQIA people may not even be recognized as such by the people that they're working with, but they still might have the sense that they are playing a role of being someone else. So then when they do have a thought and it's a little bit outside what they're hearing around them, there can be a hesitance because you're breaking your role, right? You're giving yourself away in a sense that might be uncomfortable. And once everybody is kind of cool with you and knows what's up, then you can lose that, and that sort of constant tax on your thinking process and your creativity is removed.
Interesting. Yeah. So imposter syndrome, I'm less familiar with that. I'm interested to learn more about. Yeah, if you don't mind just kind of going into
Sure.
that a little bit more, what imposter syndrome is.
Sure. It's as simple as not having a role model that well matches who you consider yourself to be. So then you feel like you are impersonating a more traditional expert in your field, right? Which might present as an older, richer, white male, heterosexual person. And if you are, the further you are removed from that in your own mind, the harder it is to square who you want to be with the kind of person you're aspiring to become, right? How do you become the thing that you don't have a good example of, right? So there can be a sense, even when you're doing very well, that you have to work extra hard and you have to try and fit into the norms even more than your coworkers might have to in order to feel sure of yourself. And as I mentioned, it can actually backfire because you are um, potentially cutting away and leaving behind the parts of yourself that don't fit into this mold you have in your mind.
Something I'd like to add to that is particularly in talking about what's unique about imposter syndrome and your confidence levels and your performance for that matter. That it affects other communities, but particularly in the LGBTQ community, is how you present and how you, whether it's the clothes that you wear, how you do your hair, and how you choose to talk. I would say probably people of color relate very well. And when you look at it, intersectionality. So, those who are not familiar, intersectionality is the idea that there are multiple different parts of yourself, like your racial, your gender, and all of these different diversities. You're not just one of those things. Like, yes, I'm white, but there is more to me and my identity. There's my neurodiversity, there's my cultural background, and my LGBTQ identity. I mean, so all of these things have a factor. And particularly when we say, be your authentic self, we have no problem. Come as you are. Well, what does that really look like, right? So, you look at unemployment rates, you look at hiring practices and things like that, particularly for the transgender community. I mean, and then put on top of that, if you're also of color, you're talking about several different intersectionality factors that are culturally working against you. And so I think what a lot of individuals don't quite realize is that how you talk, if your clothes don't match what is expected, you I don't know if individuals realize just how much of what we're afraid to truly come as we are, and then
Oh,
ask
that's
us
a really
to speak our mind in a meeting and feel comfortable in what we're wearing.
No, that's a really important point. Thank you for sharing that and yeah, teaching me about imposter syndrome because I think, yeah, it's to put a name to it, which is something that, yeah, it's going on definitely, within my, community as a BIPOC member. It's definitely something, that we also have to deal with. So thank you for that. And so my next question. So when you decided to come out in the workplace, did you find that it changed your experience there? Did you find in any way that it helped or did it hinder your experience in the workplace? Did you find that, your colleagues or asking you to speak for the entire LGBTQ community, or what was your experience like when you came out there?
So there were definitely some awkward moments at first for me, and still I would say my experience was easier than some. So I'm in a financial institution, but in an IT department where it's a little less conservative than some parts, right? And I had a marriage which ended in a difficult fashion where I felt I had to leave rather suddenly for my safety. And some of my coworkers were aware of this, and on some level were just cheering on me being safe and well. So whatever I told them that was not me going back to my uh, eventually ex-husband was going to be positively received, I think, to some extent. Uh, but even so, uh, dating a woman would come as a surprise to them, certainly. Dating multiple people at the same time and everyone being aware of it would come as a surprise to them. Um, and it wasn't often an issue because I just don't talk about my personal life at work a lot. So there were a couple of people who were curious and ended up finding out more about it. And I certainly got some questions about online dating because, from their point of view, I was being pretty successful at it, I suppose. Uh, but uh, it just led to what I think were some positive interactions where everybody learned a little bit, came out a little stronger for it, and were able to be a little bit friendlier and more open afterwards. So, in the end, it was a positive experience. And nowadays, I have links to a nonprofit I work with in New York City that helps to support the polyamorous community. And it's on my LinkedIn page and it's on my resume. And if potential employers don't look into what that organization is about, then that that's on them, really. I'm as honest and open about it as I can be, but I don't feel any need to volunteer that information in an interview because it really has nothing to do with my job in any sort of explicit everyday fashion.
The whole, how are you supposed to disclose and everything is like such a chaotic experience. It's not like it's a straight line in the first place anyway. And so I agree. I don't think it's necessary to be like, hi, I'm doing an interview and here's my identity. And it's just not relevant. But I do think that as you come out in these micro moments, like for me, it was I had a experience where it was after a recent breakup. I saw someone that looked like their doppelganger, and I was out to coffee with a colleague. Like it just something so mundane.
Hmm.
And he's like, "Why are you so upset?" I was like, "I have to step out real quick. I'll be right back." I took a little bit longer than I probably should have, and I explained the situation. I said I could have sworn that that was a girl I was dating. She meant a lot to me, and you know, I didn't come out to the entire workplace because it wasn't relevant. Like, hi, hello, like no. So but as conversations came up, or some of like those micro conversations of pronouns or relationships, hey, he's seeing anybody, you would the holiday party example, you come out in those kind of moments, and you know you come out in your own time either way too.
So one additional question is, what can companies and coworkers do to help support colleagues in the LGBTQ communities?
Hmm. I, that's a tricky one, I think. Don't you think? For me, just awareness is a big step in the right direction because I see a lot of people that still tend to assume that everyone around them is heterosexual, cisgender, and probably partnered with someone at any given time. When, we all go through our phases in life, and If you have at least 10 coworkers, chances are they are not all heterosexual cisgender people. It's just statistically unlikely to be the case. Um, so just thinking about the kind of jokes you tell in the office or the kind of assumptions you make when you ask people about their plans outside work. Something as simple as that can help people feel a lot more welcome and make them more likely to volunteer information that, you know, will help them feel more comfortable with you.
Yeah, I would say that having either resource groups or resources that you can share, places to direct people, not only does that give people somewhere to go, it gives them somewhere to learn, and it is a flag for we're here. I think that the biggest thing is you don't have to necessarily agree with, understand entirely. The big thing is just to understand that we are here, we're real, we're not making this up, and we just want to do good work, and we're AV nuts just like you.
Yeah, we're gonna
Thank
get
you.
excited when you keep adding to the numbers before the K video part, you know, 4 and then 8 and then 16. We're just as excited about that as you are, and we'll talk about it all day. So we just also want to feel comfortable um, integrating that with the rest of our lives, I would say. And from my point of view, it's a fairly gentle uh, experience, you know.
And what do you mean by gentle experience?
Uh, I I don't know if it's just my demeanor or if it is because in some ways I am privileged to be living in New York, for example. Um, but I don't find I tend to have arguments with coworkers about this sort of thing. At most, there might be an awkward silence, now and then. But I think we all tend to find each other's limits and work around them. And if there's ever an offense, it's usually enough to go, ouch, that that stung a bit. And the huge majority of people will respond with, oops, didn't mean to make you feel that way. And then it can be a teaching moment or you can just move on.
Yeah. And the other thing that we didn't touch on that is a big thing for, I mean, maybe not as much for the individual colleagues, but for management is also representation. I think that representation of the individuals who are already within this community is, I think that it's important to say that there's a lot of representation we don't see. There's a great community of us that are here. And I hope that more people feel welcome. Again, that when you come out, it's in your own time and how you feel comfortable doing it. And there's nothing wrong with not with however and wherever you are is absolutely perfect and okay. I just hope that you feel less alone by hearing our stories and talking to others. But opening up your hiring pool is another thing that can be a huge help. As I had mentioned earlier, employment rates, although have been much better than they have been, particularly for the transgender community, I think that there could absolutely be more representation.
Yeah. In an era of overall low unemployment, right? It's in
Hmm.
the general best interest of an employer to court from as large a pool of potential employees as possible, and then to ensure that when they hire this diverse crew, that they're able to get along with each other. So I think I would add that uh, in general, programs that encourage diversity, that deal with things like harassment in the workplace, are going to be valuable for the LGBTQIA crowd and helping them to feel comfortable and making sure that there is awareness of where they can go if they do need a little help. Um, for instance, I've been in organizations, not currently, but I've been in organizations where the answer is always to talk to your boss, which becomes a problem if your boss is the one who's happened to become problematic. So having at least one other option is recommended.
Well, thank you both. I really want to thank you, Stacey and Jenn, for being so candid and open about your experiences and sharing ways that we can support our colleagues and friends in the LGBTQ plus community. I think it's incredibly important to have these conversations so we have a better understanding of the experiences that others are going through, so it can help empower us, to make those necessary changes in the communities around us. So I really appreciate you lending your voice for this. And for those of you watching online, we're going to be posting resources for you to check out on DEI and B in the description underneath this video. So thank you all for taking part and watching.